behalf of the Jewish learning, get the wrong side. Good evening. I'd like to welcome all of you tonight to our program. Rabbi Orlofsky, I'm sure you're in for a treat. Let me first thank, before we begin the introductions, thank the Jewish Learning Venture. The building here, this is really my first time in this building. And as you know, we were supposed to have this at the train station, the Elkins Park train station. But it's served to be too small for the nice crowd that we have. And so at the last minute, we had to reschedule it to relocate it to this building. So I approached Robin Minkoff, who's in the back, the chief financial officer here, and she was opening the doors up. And she said, by all means, and very graciously opened up the doors and let us use it. And couldn't be nicer. So thank Robin and Phil Warnflash and the entire Jewish Learning Venture for their hospitality. My only regret is that we didn't have it at the train station, because I'm sure Rabbi Orlofsky has never spoken in a real train station. Have you ever given a lecture in a train station?
I have, but I keep getting interrupted by the computer.
He probably never gave a whole lecture. And I'm sure we could have looked forward to some good jokes that he could have cracked being at the train station. But then again, you may have gotten sidetracked.
Well, this is an easy crowd, let me tell you.
I'd like to also acknowledge the veterans, if we have any veterans here today. Being Veterans Day, or it was today, I'd like just to acknowledge and thank all the veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces for protecting us in the country we live in. Thank you very, very much. Many of you have not met our two new additions to Eitz Chaim, Rabbi Davis, Rabbi Binyamin Davis, and his wife Gevura. They moved here from Kansas City about 2 months ago to Elkins Park. Rabbi Davis is from Brighton, England. Eitz Chaim likes English people. And Mrs. Davis is from Atlanta, Georgia, Marietta, Georgia. And they've been Jewish educators in Kansas City for the past 8 years. And we're very fortunate that they chose Eitz Chaim as one of their many offers in positions, and they came to Eitz Chaim here. Rabbi Davis is the managing director of Eitz Chaim, running the day-to-day managing things, as well as programming and community engagement. And Mrs. Davis is the director of youth, women's, and college-age programs. And just in the past 2 months, they've done already a phenomenal job in initiating new programs for the youth, for the women, for college age. We wouldn't have time now to talk about all the different initiatives they've started and plan to start, but in just 60 days they've done a remarkable job. And that's really being kind of homeless. They're sort of homeless. They moved here, they bought a house, or they signed a contract to buy a house 2.5 months ago. And it was a short sale. Ended up being a very long sale. And just this week, they actually got the keys to move in their new home on Academy Lane. They've been living in a one-bedroom annex with themselves and 5 children for 2.5 months in a one-bedroom with really no luggage, no clothes, no furniture, nothing. And they've done already so much with that. So it's just mind-boggling how they could do that with such a calm equilibrium. So we can only imagine what they'll do when they're moving their home and they're fully functioning over there. So we're very excited to have them on the Eitz Chaim team. And I hope you'll get a chance to meet them if you haven't met them yet at the dessert reception afterwards. So this lecture tonight is the first one in memory of my father, Dr. Hirsh Wachs, Oliver Shalom, passed away about 1.5 years ago. And knowledge and learning was very important to him. He was a person who loved to learn about everything. Besides medicine, he was a neurologist and a psychiatrist. But he studied everything, music. He loved classical music. He went to the opera every single Sunday in Pittsburgh for the past 40, 45 years. He had thousands and thousands of records. He studied languages. He knew 5, 6 languages: Chinese, Russian, German, Spanish. And literature, he read all the time. He volunteered at Carnegie Library in Pittsburgh twice a week for many, many years. And Judaism. He studied all the time. He was the past president of Congregation Shari Torah in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh. And he was the president of Pittsburgh Kollel for a number of years. He was a longtime member and activist with Congregation Polei Tzedek. He created a society called the Rabbi Akiva and Rachel Society, which is an adult education program out of Polei Tzedek. And through that society, he brought many, many lecturers to Pittsburgh. Many. And he organized discovery seminars and Shabbatonim. He was really an activist in that. So he really accomplished a tremendous amount in his years. So this series is a very fitting way, I believe, to memorialize his vast achievements. And may the learning and inspiration from this lecture and subsequent lectures be a source of aliyah and nachas for him. Amen. The series would not have been possible without the help of my mother, who is still in Pittsburgh, Mrs. Esther Wachs. She generously gave a nice gift to be able to have this series, this being the first lecture. And she really was an equal partner in all of my father's accomplishments. She was a nurse. They met in the operating room, but that became that was the beginning of almost a 40-year, I think it was 40 years, 40-year marriage together. We'd like to also thank another key sponsor from Pittsburgh, Norman and Marilyn Sidler, very close friends of my parents, and they were a key sponsor for this series as well, Norman and Marilyn Sidler. And then we have the sponsors for tonight's lecture. I'd like to thank Michael and Ruth Gordon, Barry and Samantha Dubrow, Yossi and Rochelle Brodsky, Dr. Steve Leskowitz, Ellie and Tehila Miller, Dr. and Mrs. Gershon Bernhard, Hal and Sandra Solar, Rabbi and Mrs. Mayor Reiner, and Rabbi and Mrs. Yoshua Yamans. Actually, my children. Rabbi Yamans sitting here. Rabbi Yamans is the new rabbi of the congregation B'nai Israel Ohev Center. It's a shul in Northeast Philadelphia, Casper and Solid. And he and my daughter moved from Edmonton, Canada 2 months ago and assumed the position of the rabbi and rebbitzin of this shul. So we're very fortunate that you joined us tonight. My daughter would have been here, but she has a couple sick kids at home, and she's nursing them back to health. And now to our guest speaker. I'm going to read some of the notes I got from the website. Some of this could be 10 years old. It may not be relevant. I'm not sure, but you'll correct it if it's wrong. Rabbi Dovid Orlofsky has been involved in the field of Jewish education and outreach for over 20 years. That definitely is wrong. Over 30 years. So this is really an old website.
It's an old speaker.
Well, this can't be wrong. He grew up in North Merrick, Long Island, one of 6 boys, of whom he is the quietest. He studied in Yeshivas Chavetz Chaim and Yeshivas Heichel Torah. For 9 years, he was the Long Island director of the National Conference of Synagogue Youth, NCSY, for 9 years. Under his leadership, the region grew from 1 participant, it's amazing, 1 participant into an organization of over 1,800 teenagers and preteens involved in its various programs. In 1988, Rabbi Orlofsky moved to Israel and lives in Yerushalayim, Jerusalem today with his wife, Simi, and their children and grandchildren. He teaches Jewish studies, Talmud, Bible in various yeshivas and Jewish philosophy in many women's seminaries. He's a prolific speaker all over. His lectures have attracted thousands of people internationally. So it's really a pleasure, really a delight to have him here in Philadelphia, a place he doesn't really come to much, not sure why, but he is here. It's a rare treat to have him here. So with that, I'd like to welcome Rabbi Dovid Orlofsky.
Thank you very much, Ray Wachs, for that beautiful introduction. I couldn't have said it better myself. And the reason I don't usually come to Philadelphia is because nobody invites me. So it's really very easy. Any place, actually. But I have been in Philadelphia. I spoke here really the last time, like 15 years ago. And I never made it out this far. So it's really exciting for me to be here. And the truth is that I was in email contact with Rabbi Davis over the past couple of years trying to arrange, a trip to Kansas. And when he, finally emailed me and said, we're ready to go, he says, I'm in Philadelphia. Now, I'm happy that I didn't go to Kansas, because in Philadelphia, the worst that you have to do is run up the library steps. But in Kansas, there's a tornado that whisks you away to a different land. I'm a New Yorker. Our knowledge of everything comes from a few films that we've seen. We don't know what goes on any place outside of New York City. And when I say New York City, I'm really not including Queens. But, it's, such a wonderful thing to be able to have this opportunity to be here. And as Rabbi Wachs says, we had one location, we had to move it to another. And, I'm not foolish enough to take credit for that myself, because most of the people here have never met me, have never heard me. And, really it's because of the tremendous desire that people have to be able to introduce more meaning into their lives. And that's really the topic this evening, I think, because I can't remember what it is. It was so incredibly long. But adding meaning and spirituality to a life of meaning and how to make it more spiritual and meaningful. So, or something like that, you know what I mean? But obviously, this is something dramatic. I was on a flight sitting next to a middle-aged Israeli businessman. And he told me that he's on his way to India to meet his wife, who's already in the ashram, where they're studying Buddhism and meditation. And I said to him, why? And he says, you reach a point in your life where just going out to eat, going to shows is not enough. You want spirituality in your life. I said, you're Israeli, did you ever consider Judaism? So he laughed. And he said, what does Judaism have to do with spirituality? And I realized that therein lies the problem. And he said to me, Judaism is about doing mitzvahs. We do mitzvahs. That's what we do. You eat a matzah, you shake a lulav, you go through the steps. And that's what a lot of people's Judaism comes down to, and a lot of our education. Was how do you do this, and how do you do that, and what do we do, and where's the meaning in it? And that's really what I want to try to talk about this evening, because without that meaning, Judaism will be destroyed. We are now on Rosh Chodesh Kislev. We're now entering the month of Kislev. Kislev is, of course, the month where the holiday of Hanukkah comes in. And the Greeks wanted to destroy the Jewish people spiritually and intellectually. They did not want to destroy us physically. The Romans, it was a physical attack. The Babylonians, they wanted to destroy the temple, it was a physical attack. The Greeks did not want to destroy the temple. They wanted to defile the temple. They wanted to break down the walls of the temple. Right? When you sing, that song about Yevanim, Nikbatsu Alai. Right? The Greeks came to us. Upartsu Chomos Migdalai, V'timu Kashmanim. They broke holes in all of our walls, and they defiled our oil. That's it. That's what they did. They didn't destroy the temple. They didn't outlaw the keeping of mitzvos. They broke holes in our walls and defiled our oil. That's what they did. That was their plan. They broke holes in the walls, and then they came into the temple, and they brought their troops together. Spartacus, Eradicus, Hepatitis, let's go, And they run around, and they're touching all the oil. Tommy, I found a barrel here, General. Stick your hand in it. There you go. We've defiled all the oil. That was the plan. to defile the oil and to break holes in our walls. The Greeks confronted the Jews, and they found a people that they didn't find anyplace else. The entire world was in the grips of idolatry. Now, the Greeks also believed in idolatry. They just didn't take it as seriously. If you read, Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, they were invented the concept of science. They came to bring an intellectual revolution to the world, and there was nothing that stood in their way until they came to us. When I was a kid, I remember this still in our history book in 5th grade. Yeah, the light of Greek civilization. Right? That's what we always say. The light of Greek civilization. It's interesting. In Torah thought, there's 4 exiles. The Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. And they are summed up in different places. The second verse in the Torah, V'ha'aretz ha'yisu so v'vo v'choshech al pnei sahom. There was void and nothingness and darkness upon the deep water. And those correspond to the 4 exiles. Rome, which we've been in their exile for 2,000 years, that's the deep water. But the darkness on top of it, that's Greece. We look at them as darkness. Why? Because the Jews are supposed to be a light unto the nations. Say the Greeks, no, we are the light. You understand that they suddenly come into conflict with the light. We're going to light up the world. Who's going to light up the world? That really became the issue between us and the Greeks. Yeah? An amazing thing. King Solomon, smartest man who ever lived, marries 1,000 wives. Why would the smartest man in the world want 1,000 mother-in-laws? Think about that. Now, I want you to appreciate this. When a person gets married, they spend the next week in Sherwood Brothers. Solomon died at the age of 52, for what I consider to be obvious reasons. Yeah? If you make the calculation, he spent most of his life in Sherwood Brothers. He gets married, there's a week of Sherwood Brothers, gets married again, a week of Sherwood Brothers. How much parva ice cream can you eat? I have no question it was the bareka, the first course, that killed the guy. You know what's in that dough? It's terrible for you, So that's what he spends his whole time. Marries 1,000 wives. Now, a king is only allowed to marry 18 wives. I know it's tough. But 1,000 wives is over the top. He was a smart guy. What was he thinking? It says from Dessel, listen to what he was thinking. He decided that he would marry the princess of every single nation in the world. And they would convert to Judaism. He'd have a kid. He'd raise that kid as a Jew. And when his father-in-law died, he'd send his son to assume the throne. And through this process, he would begin to make the entire world Jewish. That was his plan. And when he married the daughter of Paro, listen what the Gemara says. The angel Gabriel took a stick and stuck it in the headwaters of the Tiber River. And around it formed dirt that became the 7 hills of Rome. Okay, there's obviously some connection here. Why? When the Babylonians exiled us, they took us all to Babylonia. They left us as an autonomous people. We had it so good that when the Second Temple was being rebuilt, most of the Jews didn't go back to Israel. We had an autonomous country, a Jewish country. We had our own officers. We had our own princes. There wasn't such a drive to go back. Everything was good. The Romans exiled us across the face of the earth. From Spain, says that's where next week I'm going to Spain. Every year on Thanksgiving we go to another European country. I lead a tour. I don't really lead a tour. I come along with the tour, and I give classes, nothing to do with Spain, and and I stay in a nice hotel, and we eat. They fly the caterer from Israel, and they make everything fresh, and it's roughing it, but it's one of the many sacrifices I make for my people. But we did Prague, we did Venice, we did Greece, now we're doing Spain. But the Spanish community began during the time of the Second Temple. That's when we went out. We spread across the face of the earth. Why? Because how do you light up the world? If you want to light up a room, how do you light up a room? There's two ways. One is you put one big chandelier in the middle of the room, lights up the whole room. Or you light little candles all around. But the little candles create shadows. It's not as effective. There's two ways to light up the room. The temple was supposed to be the light of the world. Gemara in Baba Basra says. People have trouble hearing? They make things today. You know. Anyway, okay. Is this helping?
Yeah.
I can't believe it. There's a tiny little box here. Anyway, okay. It's all psychological. Anyway, I could even turn this off and you'd think that I'm using it. It's unbelievable. Anyway, you know, when you want to light up a room, you make little candles all over, or you make one big chandelier. The Gemara in Baba Basra tells about Herod the Great. Herod the Great killed off all the sages except for one guy, blinded him and threw him into prison. And he was a slave. He decided he was going to take over from the Chashmonaim. And the Hanukkah story has a sad ending. He kills off all of the Chashmonaim except for one girl, Miriam. And he's going to force her to marry him so that's going to be her claim to the throne. And the Talmud says that she got up on top of a building and said, I am the last Chashmonai left alive, the last Hasmonean. And anyone who says they're from the Hasmoneans from this point onwards is just a slave. And she threw herself to her death. Says the Gemara, Herod was not put off by this. He preserved her in honey and took her out on state occasions. So it looked like she was still alive. And by the way, that is the source. If you ever hear a husband say, honey, and you wonder where most people don't know it's from that Gemara. Anyway, so he was afraid that the sages would oppose him, so he killed all the sages except Moab and Buddha. He blinds him, puts him in prison, and then goes down to see him. And he says, what are you in here for? He says, well, the king, blinded me and put me in prison. He says, you should curse that king. And he says, it's forbidden to curse a king. He says, he's not a real king. He says, nonetheless, you can't curse him. He says, nobody will know. He says, a little birdie will tell him. So Herod says, you won't turn against this king even though you know how terrible it is? He says, you're not allowed to turn against the king. So he says, I can't believe it. I wiped out my most loyal servants. What can I do to make up for it? He says, you destroyed the sages. Torah is called the light. They're the light of Israel. Rebuild the temple, which is called the light of Israel. So Solomon was supposed to build the temple, and it was supposed to be a beacon that would light up the whole world. Instead, he decided to use the approach of the little candles.